Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody here to our virtual town hall that we're hosting tonight. I really appreciate everybody giving this time. It's going to be an exciting night. We're going to try to go for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes or so. We're going to have a couple of our council candidates come join us that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But first, I want to just say that it's wonderful to be here. Our campaign has got a ton of momentum, and it's because people are interested in our community. And I think coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that I've seen that I think a lot of people are seeing is just this desire to be part of the community, to be part of Bethlehem's future, to look at things a little bit different, and just bring kind of an energy and a vibrancy to our city that we need as we emerge from the pandemic. So first of all, I want to say is that we're doing this here from my living room and a couple other people's living rooms. So we're doing this technology for the first time. So if hopefully there's no hiccups. We've tried it out, but I wanted to throw that out there. Our council candidates are going to join us every 15 minutes. So at about 6:15, we're going to be joined by my colleague, Councilman Grace Crampsey Smith. And then Kiera Wilhelm is going to join us at 6:30. And then Hillary Kwiatek is going to join us at 6:45. And we're going to kind of jointly answer a bunch of questions. And then at 7 o'clock, everybody's going to come back on. We had a lot of interest in wanting to be a part of this activity. We are also doing this next Wednesday at 6 p.m., where I'm going to welcome on some other fantastic candidates for local office, Rachel Leone, who's running for Bethlehem City Council, and also our school board candidates, Mike Fascinato, Shayla White, and Shannon Patrick, who are all leading our district in wonderful ways. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about the collaboration and cooperation between the school district and the city, how we have a lot of shared mission, shared priorities, and kind of talk about some of the initiatives that we're working on together and how we can do more going into the future. Today, we're going to try to hit all of the topics that people want to talk about, whether or not that's emerging from the pandemic, supporting small business, our climate action plan. We're going to try our public safety and what we think we can do there. We're going to try to hit all of these topics. But one of the reasons why we're scheduling multiple kind of town halls here are so people have an opportunity to get their questions answered. So that's kind of a little bit of a rundown of where we are. So I think we can get started here, and we'll get started here with the first question that we're going to post. Okay, so our first question here is, what is the city going to do with its stimulus funds? $33 million, right? And I think that first thing that we should talk about is that $33 million is coming over 2 years. Half of it is coming this year and half of it is coming next year. And the first thing that we need to do is find out what we can and cannot spend the money on. If you've read any articles in the national press and even locally, you see that school districts and cities and counties are having a lot of conversation about it, what exactly we're able to spend the money on and what we can't spend the money on. The second thing that I think that we need to do is that we need to check with our counties and our other levels of government here as far as what their priorities are, because we want to make sure that as many people have been affected as the pandemic as possible are going to get this assistance. Our Congresswoman Susan Wild, our Senator Bob Casey, our President Biden fought hard for our most vulnerable citizens to get this support, and we're going to make sure that it goes where it needs to go. And then we also need to kind of balance the idea of what can we spend now versus what is better to be spent a year from now or 2 years from now. I think everybody would agree that as we emerge from the pandemic, there have been certain groups of people that have been adversely affected by the pandemic more so than others. And, we need to both make sure that the people are getting the help and the assistance in the short term, but also take a look at what can we do as far as systems are concerned. A lot of our systems failed during the pandemic across our country and locally. If you look at healthcare, if you look at technology access for education, if you look at our economic system, a lot of people fell behind, not because they did anything wrong, but because the system was not prepared for something such as the pandemic. And I'll give you one example that was specifically included in the legislation that I know a lot of people in Bethlehem are interested in, is the idea of expanding high-speed internet and expanding broadband access. My wife is a family physician, and she would tell me stories about how people didn't have the high-speed internet at home, so they had to leave their house, possibly COVID positive, to come into the doctor's office when there could be a virtual visit. We've read a lot about school districts having to work to get out the hotspots, get out the laptops to students and as we call that, the digital divide. So that's one of those things that you kind of look at. It's like, what can we spend the money on in the short term versus the long term? There are a lot of ideas out there right now, and I think that we had a little bit of a conversation about it at City Council last night, but there's going to be a lot of meetings about that in the coming weeks as we get direction from the federal government as far as what exactly that money can be spent on and what it can't be spent on. But it's got to be a combination of short-term and long-term needs. I think that in the legislation, it says all the money needs to be spent by the end of 2024. So that's a little over 3.5 years away. So as we start to get a better idea, we need to start to focus more there as far as, what we want to, what we're going to try to spend that money on. Okay, what do we got? What do we got next? What is going on with the climate action plan you proposed? So one of the things that I've been talking about, and this is something else that came up at City Council yesterday, was that we're going to be actually kicking off that climate action plan next Monday at 4 p.m. And we'll get that link out through our social media. It'll be on the city's website and things like that. And what we're going to do on Mondays, we're actually going to kind of give a summary of the plan. It's a very comprehensive document, and we're going to kind of talk about necessarily what are some of the things that are in the plan that we're going to focus on. And we're actually going to create a series of events throughout 2021, just because we don't think that we can cover everything we need to cover in 45 minutes or an hour. So some of the highlights that we have in this particular plan, or that we're going to talk about on Monday, is like the principles that kind of run through the plan, the idea of equity, resilience, community health. How do we build a sustainable, inclusive community? We're going to talk about how we're setting community-wide energy reduction goals, that we're creating an educational climate challenge program for residents to be educated about these issues. We're going to talk about our own municipal operations. We're creating an environmental justice council. We're also going to create a green ribbon commission, I think is what we're calling it, which is going to be the different institutions that are in the city of Bethlehem that are doing wonderful things with sustainability. We're going to put together kind of a petition type thing where people are going to be able to show their support for the climate action plan. And then one of the things that I'm most interested in and that I really want to prioritize is creating like an office of sustainability within City Hall. We have wonderful departments, but a lot of the sustainability initiatives are kind of siloed in the different departments. So one of the big recommendations in the plan is to create a director of sustainability for the city of Bethlehem. And then the final thing we're going to do there is we're probably going to formalize the working groups that have been part of this process, because what we need is we need those working groups that are going to continue to be able to meet, to implement, to advocate for these policies, and also lobby. A lot of things that we want to do, we might not be able to do exactly how we would like to do them now, because the state and the federal government don't give us the power to do it. So we're going to talk about all of this on Monday, and then we're going to kind of talk about the next steps of implementation. We're going to set out like kind of our goals for the first 2 years, and we've been planning this now for a couple of years, and I think it's going to be a wonderful. A wonderful day as we kick off our climate action plan there. Okay, what the heck can we do with Broad Street, East and West? I don't know if Janet B has watched our one of our latest Bethlehem Corner videos, but we talked about how Broad Street lives up to its name. And I mean, if you take a look at the north side Broad Street there, in between Linden Street and Center Street in particular, we were there at the kickoff of the Bethlehem Food Co-op location announcement a couple weeks ago, and one of the things we talked about is how it's a great project for that neighborhood, but we need to do some other infrastructure there. We need to narrow Broad Street. We need to make it more walkable. We need to turn Linden Street into a two-way street because of just the general speed and energy and all the things that go on Broad Street on the east side there that we don't like. And when you get to the west side, we talked about this too when we visited the Rose Garden. It's a mess. If you brought someone to Bethlehem from another city and you took them over to the west side, they would instantly see that everything revolves around the fact that Broad Street was built for cars and not for people. And it's almost like it's a river between the two different parts of the west side there. And the west side is beautiful, but like it could be even more if we turn Broad Street into the type of street that you want to walk on, that you want to be a part of. So it's, once again, it's like, how do we narrow that street? How do we slow down the cars? How do we make it more walkable? How do we, do some infrastructure investment that's going to lead people to want to be a part of Broad Street, rather than the way it feels now, where the further you get away from Broad Street, kind of the calmer and the quieter it becomes, because you don't have to deal with the speed. Now, I take pride in the fact that I will tell it like it is, and that's not an easy thing, and that's going to take a while to do. But the kind of steps you need to follow is, you need to come up with a master plan for Broad Street, and then you need to show momentum every year. So maybe it means that you're only doing a block or 2 blocks a year, or maybe you're only affording a couple different projects when that grant funding comes through. But you're trying to do whatever it is that you can to show people that this is an important structural thing. And, it's such an underutilized asset there. And we have beautiful churches, beautiful businesses, beautiful houses on Broad Street, but you don't feel those. You don't feel them. You might feel them when you're inside, but you don't feel them when you're on the streetscape and you're walking around. So it's absolutely a priority for us going forward. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to see what we can do to kind of improve Broad Street, so Janet B doesn't have to ask what the heck is going on with Broad Street there. So, okay. So I think now is probably a good time here to bring on, I think we're going to be able to do this technology friendly here. We're going to bring on our friend. Oh, there you are, Councilwoman Grace Crampsey-Smith, who's been a colleague of mine since 2019. And I guess before we start taking any questions, Grace, I probably should give you a minute here just to kind of explain, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, why you're running for city council, and then we'll take some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Willie. And thanks for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm thrilled. So I'm Grace Crampsey-Smith. I'm on my 2nd year of city council. And I've lived in Bethlehem for over 30 years. I'm originally from the co-regions. I was the youngest of 7. My father was a police chief. My mother was a nurse. I was a free reduced lunch student. So I really get it as far as pinching pennies and growing up in poverty. I'm the very grateful mother of 3 children right now. Shannon is going to graduate from law school next month. Bridget is going to graduate from med school next month. I got 2 off my payroll. And then Brendan is in his 3rd year of college. And I'm just so grateful that I have such great, wonderful kids. Right now, I've been a guidance counselor at Easton High School for about 16 years. And previous to that, I was an addictions counselor. I coordinated and administered services for people with developmental disabilities and those with mental health diagnoses and their families. And I taught at the college level on the ADA and the IDEA. So why do I want to continue to be on city council? Well, I always have been involved in politics, and I always wanted to run. And I have to say, I always thought my professional and personal experience would be valuable on city council. And I have to say, being in my 2nd year, it really is true. I'm amazed at how many issues come up to us on city council, and I can relate to them. For example, I'm really passionate about affordable housing because I work with so many children at the high school and families who are homeless and transient. I worked in the mental health field, in addictions. My father was a police chief. I have 3 nephews that are policemen. So there's so many issues that are hit home for me. And I really feel like it's been an honor and privilege to serve the great people of Bethlehem. And I hope I can count on everyone's support to continue to do so.
Thank you, Grace. And then we'll get started here. So I guess we can put up the first question for me and Grace. And what we're going to try to do here as this question comes up is we're going to try to kind of go back and forth a little bit. We're going to try to keep our answers to about a minute or so to try to get as many different topics as possible. But we also want to have a thorough conversation. So we're going to kind of play that by ear as the first time we're doing this. So our first question here is affordable housing. Why the need from Rich M? Grace, I'll let you take that one to start.
Okay, great. Good first question, because that is my passion. As I said before, over the last 5 years especially, I have seen such a significant increase in the number of my students and families who have become homeless and transient. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that we have an affordable housing crisis. And what I mean by affordable is housing for the workforce population, housing for the low middle class, not low income HUD housing. For example, in the Lehigh Valley alone, 3 out of every 10 homes are cost burden, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing needs. In Bethlehem in 2010, we had 20,000 units that were over $1,000 a month to rent. In 2019, we have 45,000 units that cost over $1,000 to rent. That's more than double the amount of units that are over $1,000. It's worse for the renters. 51% of renters versus 24% of homeowners are cost burdened. We see it. I hear it every day. People that are born and raised in Bethlehem can't afford to live here anymore. And while I certainly am for development, the majority of our development in the last several years have been high-end luxury condos and apartments, and we just need more diverse housing for multiple income people and families. That's why I started the Affordable Housing Inclusive Bethlehem Task Force.
Thank you, Grace. And I would just add a couple things to that. One is that, one of the things that we're seeing come out of the pandemic, and I think everybody's probably seen this, is like the current housing prices in the Lehigh Valley are at a level that we have never seen before. And I think that there's a lot of concern that as our economy kind of changes coming out of the pandemic, as people start to look at more virtual work, and if people aren't driving into New York City or making long commutes 5 days a week, that the price of housing in the Lehigh Valley is going to get even higher. I think Grace also made a great point. One of the things that I always say about this issue is that it's even a bigger issue than we think it is, because a lot of people don't want to admit it's an issue, but it absolutely is. And when you look at the data, you see that it is increasing. One of the things that we've tried to do that, Grace and I have talked about that, we're going to be talking more about in the coming weeks, is tying our economic development incentives in the city. For a long time after Bethlehem Steel shut down, we needed economic development incentives just because of the sheer cost of the environmental cleanup and just the challenge of trying to redevelop and revitalizing buildings in a way in which you're going to preserve the history. But as we kind of move forward, one of our goals is to tie those incentives into helping with the affordable housing mission. And that's going to have to take a couple of different roles that we're going to be talking about more in the coming weeks, but it's part of the conversation that we're having. And then I guess the last thing I would say before we go to the next question is, we also need to take a look at people that are being burdened by housing costs. What are the other issues that they're being burdened by on a monthly basis, as far as their bills, as far as access to food? Grace and I are both passionate about the Bethlehem Food Co-op. We've seen the story about A-Hearts over the last couple of weeks. Like every kind of aspect of the cost drivers for people on a month-to-month basis and our most vulnerable populations, we need to take a look at our systems in our community and see whether or not they're working or not. And as I said before, the pandemic showed a lot of them are not working. So we need to start with that. And Grace works at Easton High School and I work at Allen High School. Those are our full-time jobs. And we live with that every day, as I know most of the other people in city council do, as far as spending time with people and talking to people and trying to help people out. So I think affordable housing is obviously got to be a priority, but we also have to expand the different issues that are connected to housing costs. Okay, so long question here from Kate. Hello, could you give a status update about the strip of buildings on Broad Street, former home of Hello Burritos? I walked past today and could see inside the windows of one of the buildings, and there was 1 foot tall moss mold blanketing the floor and walls. I'm not able to share a photo, but took one of what was visible. I think anybody would tell you, thank you, Kate, for the question. I think anybody would tell you that the key to our downtown is what's going to happen to Broad Street on the north side. And even before the pandemic, those buildings were vacant and they were an eyesore and they were a problem. So, as we go forward, I think one of the things that we talk about is how do we expand the energy of Main Street up past onto Broad Street into those neighborhoods that we've talked about before with Northside 2027 and things like that. So it's absolutely a priority for me. We've started to see some movement as far as redevelopment of the Boyd. I think it's a super important project. And I'm looking forward to the city working with the owners of the buildings there as we come out of the pandemic. And then I have some other thoughts as well, but I'll let Grace answer this as well.
Okay. Thank you. Well, very good question. And again, I totally concur with Willie. We need to look at all the options. For Broad Street, again, it's a gem. That's a hidden gem. I frequent churches and stores and restaurants on Broad, and it is sad that in certain areas of Broad, it's a lot more appealing than other areas of Broad and downtown. But I think as far as the blight goes, one thing that I talked about when we had a Southside Vision meeting a week or two ago, and one issue that the residents brought up similar is blighted properties that are left vacant, especially by developers. And I'm looking into that in other municipalities. What they do is they impose a fine if there's going to be a property that's going to be left vacant and blighted after so long. You're going to get fined, and you're continually going to get fined. And that's something that I really want to look into and propose in the near future. Northside 2020, the area that Broad Street is in, I think that's going to be very valuable. I've seen the sketches, and that's really going to enhance the area. The other thing that's going to help on Broad Street, especially by New and Getter, is the Walnut Street Garage. We're going to have to do something with that. And when we rebuild it or whatever we do to that, it's going to be enhanced, and hopefully it's going to flow over and enhance into Broad Street area. The other thing I would say finally is, what we're looking at in our inclusionary housing task force is bringing some incentives to the developers. If they want to do development, fine, but they have to do something like State College in Pittsburgh does. If you don't want to do every 10th unit as affordable, then you have to donate toward a housing trust fund. And we could use that housing trust fund to fix the blighted properties and make them into housing units that are affordable.
Yeah, and I would just add to that as well as, I think that our businesses in both North and South, on North and South side, would say that we want more people living downtown. And obviously we have to do that to fit into the scale of our downtowns. But if you take a look at that area of Broad Street, if you take a look at the Walnut Street Garage, as Grace said, is that when that comes down, there's got to be a housing component when it goes back up. And it becomes a little bit of a chicken or egg thing. Like, do businesses want to invest there and then people come, or do people come and then businesses want to invest there? So you kind of have to be working on both of those parallel tracks. But our businesses, especially coming out of the pandemic, they want to know, like, where are the people coming from? It can't just be people that are driving in from the suburbs and other areas. You need people living and working and playing in these areas. And then, Grace had mentioned Northside 2027. One of the goals when I had proposed that a couple years ago is, like, how do you make the connection with those residential neighborhoods that are closer to downtown and closer to Broad Street even stronger? We all know when we go to some cities, and we have some areas like this in Bethlehem, that walk downtown is one of the most enjoyable ones you can get. And it doesn't feel like you're walking half a mile or, a quarter of a mile or whatever, because it is an enjoyable walk that you feel safe and things like that. So I think that one of the things that we do is, as we start to invest in the infrastructure and as we start to make those streets and neighborhoods around there more connected to our downtown, we're going to be able to even bring more people downtown and show businesses that, like, hey, it's worth going into this building. It's worth redeveloping this building because we have the people that are going to come to support your business. Okay, can you talk about COVID and the impact on the city, community, and steps to recover? Okay, Grace, I'll let you take that one to start.
Thank you. Well, another good question. And the impact is significant in every area. The city has been hit by COVID. We've lost probably $4 to $5 million because of COVID. We lost money from the casino revenues, taxes, the businesses. Willie and I have met with the businesses throughout COVID, and we have collaborated and done everything we could to try to support them. For example, we supported the mayor with the park list. We encouraged the mayor and got him to agree to increase the length of the time the park lists were there. So we still have to focus on the businesses in the community because they've really been hit hard. And also then we also have to look at the individuals and the families. People lost jobs, people got sick with COVID, they have lasting impact, and unfortunately people died. We have almost 100 people in our community that we lost to COVID. Many steps to recover. As a mental health professional, I think a lot about the mental health component. We're going to have a lot of people with PTSD and anxiety and depression. We're going to have the mental health services there. As far as the American Rescue Plan, that we're going to get the $33 million, I think it's important that we have a balance with that. We talked about this last night in our city council meeting. There's a lot of questions, and we'll probably know in about 6 weeks that the Treasury Department has to give us answers to specifically how we can spend the money. But I know for a fact that we can spend the money on helping the homeless as well as put it toward affordable housing. One thing I'm going to advocate for is we have to get a permanent brick and mortar shelter in Bethlehem for the homeless, because we're the only city in the Lehigh Valley that doesn't have that right now. We also threw around the aspect of, can we maybe give like a tax refund, because it killed us to have to increase taxes last year, but we had no other choice. So maybe we can look at on an income basis, can we do some kind of tax refund? So basically, I think it's going to be a balance of, we have to take the money we're getting from the rescue plan, and we're going to have to put it into the city as to what we need, because we had a big loss because of COVID, but also in the community, into individuals, into families, into businesses.
Yeah, and I would add to that just a couple of things. Like, if we talk about the impact, like, I believe the pandemic should have opened everybody's eyes in America about some of the failures that we have in our current systems. And I've often said that just because something is working for me doesn't mean that it's working, because we tend to look at things about whether or not it works for me or my family, which is obviously important, but it's also, how is it affecting everybody? How is it affecting people that you don't know? How is it affecting people that aren't in your social circles? So, as we come out of the pandemic, I think we have to look at all of our systems. As before, we talked before about the idea of technology. I think that our health bureau has learned a lot about how you necessarily plan for these type of, if this would ever happen again, necessarily kind of like the holes in our safety net in our community. One of the other things we need to do is, I think we need to show people that coming out of the pandemic is that we understand that there is this energy and there's this vibrancy and there's this urgency. I mean, our small businesses, as we know, I mean, they took an incredible hit during the pandemic through no fault of their own. And what they want right now from government and other people is confidence that their investment, that if they hold on, that like people are going to come back. And, it's our job to make it as easy as possible for our Chamber of Commerce to have events in our downtowns. It's make it as easy as possible for things like permitting and things like that. But also, we need to find ways to make sure that, the holes and things like that existed before the pandemic, that were exacerbated by the pandemic, that we put those on top of mind. And, Grace talked about that as well with a homeless shelter, is that oftentimes homeless shelters or issues with people that are homeless come up when there is a real serious problem. And it can't be that way. This is an opportunity for us to take a look at that issue in Bethlehem and really try to come up with a better solution. It doesn't necessarily mean that the city is going to take 100% control, but you put together a coalition of voices in our community that is committed to trying to fix this particular situation. Okay, so were we going to answer another question here, or is that are we going to bring on? I guess we'll bring on Kiera here. So anyway, I want to thank Grace for stopping by here. Grace will be back at 7 o'clock or so as we all kind of come back with our closing thoughts there. But Councilwoman Grace Cramsey Smith, her information is down there at the bottom. Wonderful colleague. I personally can't say enough positive things about Grace. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your thoughts, and thank you for your service, Grace.
Thanks so much. And the feelings are mutual. Thank you, Willie.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we are going to transition here to welcome on my good friend and city council candidate, Kiera Wilhelm.
Hi, Willie.
Hello, Kiera. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Always smiling and positive. I love it.
Always.
So, Kiera, just like with Grace, why don't we give you a minute to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your candidacy, and then we'll start taking some questions.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And first, I'd like to thank you for hosting this event. It's a really wonderful opportunity. We don't get to meet and talk to people in person so much these days. Not that I've run a campaign before, so I don't know what it's like to do that. But having the opportunity to talk with you and folks out there is a really wonderful one. So just tell you a little bit about me and about my relationship to the city of Bethlehem. I was not born and raised here, but I have loved Bethlehem for a long time. I actually chose Bethlehem not once, but twice. The first time was in 1989. I came to Bethlehem as a freshman at Moravian College. And in fact, part of the reason I chose Moravian is because of the city of Bethlehem. I was really drawn to this place even then. And I ended up staying for a year after graduation. I graduated in 1993 with my degree in English and education and lived here for another year. before moving away to start my career in teaching. So I did do that for a while. And then in 1999, I decided to go back to school to get my master's degree. As many of my teaching colleagues were doing part-time, I decided that I wanted to do that full-time. So I applied to graduate programs, was accepted to the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And so I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and ended up living there for 14 years. And in that time, I did get back into classroom teaching. I also worked in nonprofit arts administration. I ran the education department at Boston Lyric Opera for several years. And then I ended up doing development and fundraising work for another performing arts education, so my arts organization. So my experience really has a thread of education through all of it, even in the work of development and fundraising, where you are sort of teaching people about an organization and sort of trying to inspire them to support. So in 2013, I decided to move back to Bethlehem, and I was really excited about that. One of the things I noted at the time, and notice more and more in the years that have passed, is that there are so many similarities between Cambridge and Bethlehem, some really significant ones. They're both anchored by two major educational institutions and many others as well. They have a very rich history, an incredible arts and culture scene, great diversity. And the thing about Bethlehem being a smaller city, it sort of invites you to get involved in a different way. And, you know, fast forward, here I am as a testament to that, right? So for the last 4+ years, I have served as the director of FIG Bethlehem magazine. Sorry, this camera's backwards. Here's the most recent issue of FIG. So I've been very proud to serve in that role. And I'm also a celebrant with the Lehigh Valley Celebrants team. So I officiate weddings and other important life milestone events. I've also had the privilege of getting involved in many organizations via boards and committees and projects, including with YWCA Bethlehem, Touchstone Theater, the Bethlehem Public Library, Bach Choir of Bethlehem, Ice House Tonight Performance Series, Lehigh Valley Creative Arts Project. I'm a very proud member of the Food Co-op. I was very pleased to learn recently that I am considered a pioneer member. I joined the co-op before I even officially moved back to Bethlehem, in fact. I want to do more. And ultimately, in a nutshell, that's why I'm here running for city council. You know, and I hold dear, you know, values that you've probably seen in my platform and press releases, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, working on green spaces and a walkable city, normalizing and improving public transportation, actively supporting, of course, through my work at FIG, supporting and sustaining our small business community, both after the pandemic and into the future, and working, as Grace spoke so eloquently about, on affordable housing and housing insecurity and homelessness. So I'm very pleased to be running for city council, and look forward to getting support of all the folks out there.
Thank you, Kiera. Okay, our first question here is, it says, do you have any thoughts or plans for improving pedestrian biking safety and accessibility, as well as decreasing speeds on the 378 hill-to-hill bridge? I will talk a little bit about that. Is that I think that one of the things that we have in our city is we do have kind of a car culture. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to take a look at that from a structural point of view. As far as the places where, as I said before, Broad Street was designed for cars, it wasn't designed for people. And we need to, from a kind of systemic point of view, take a look at that. But there's a lot we can do as far as walkability is concerned. And I think, as you know, I won't repeat my comments before. I'll let Kiera kind of talk about her own kind of comments there. But, you know, I think as 378 Bridge, which is set to get redone sometime in the next several years, I think it's going to obviously be a priority as well for us, is that intersection there, and how do we cut down on the speeding vehicles.
Yeah, and I heard you say when you were speaking with Grace that we all bring our own sort of lenses and to situations, and what might work for you might not work for others, and again, we all come with our own experiences. And one of mine is having lived in a city, Cambridge, namely a city that is very walkable and actively promotes walkability and public transportation and bikeability, and it is something that is an important issue to everybody there. It's also a very traffic-filled city. And I'm sure this question does not mention the pedestrian bridge, but I'm sure many of you out there have heard about the plans, the sustainability, the study that already was underway for the pedestrian bridge, which, I really love, because I live sort of at one side of the Fahey Bridge, and for some time my office was on the south side. I'm working from home now, but it's a pleasure to be able to walk to work. That's a normal part of my life. But I think it's very important that we create the infrastructure to make that possible for people who want to walk, for people who are interested in fitness and exercise, for people who are interested in sustainability, for people who don't have vehicles to travel with. I appreciate the improvements to the Fahey Bridge thus far, but we can do more to make the city more walkable and to sort of get the word out about how to do that safely.
I would just add to that is, like, I agree. And I think if you look, and I think everybody on city council does a lot of walking and biking and running. And it's one of those things that I know my mom goes for her walk every morning, and then she texts me and says all of the intersections that are not walker friendly. And I mean, that's something that we need to change the culture there, and we need to do everything we can to create that type of community.
And I'll just jump in and say, too, in addition to creating the culture of people who walk and bike, it's important to educate our drivers about that as well. It's obviously a significant safety issue. And I've noticed, crossing at the crosswalks on Main Street, it's not a given that a driver will stop, even though there's the signpost in the middle of the street. So it's really important that we're kind of educating both sides of that coin.
Okay. Has your experience at Fig magazine shaped your decision to run for city council? Marie W. I take it that question is first for you, Kiera.
I was going to say, you're welcome to jump in, but unquestionably, my role at Fig has played a huge part in my decision to run for city council. I think a number of people have referred to me as the small business candidate, which I appreciate and value that. Certainly, I think sort of the most obvious way in which Fig has impacted my decision is through my very meaningful relationships with countless business owners in Bethlehem and telling their story. And in particular, watching them for this last year, I have been in awe as they have navigated the ever shifting sands of the pandemic. But in addition to that, if you're a reader of Fig, you know this, that we have the opportunity through Fig to tell the stories of so many wonderful, impactful people in the city, so from leaders to volunteers. In this latest issue that I just held up, we had the real privilege of telling the story of John Noble and Jenny Gilrain. Jenny is a local teacher and activist who noticed the chimney swifts flying in and out of the chimney over at the Mason
the Masonic Temple.
Masonic Temple, thank you. And she spied them and contacted John Noble, the developer. And as a result of that conversation, they painstakingly preserved, and at great cost to the developer, preserved that chimney to preserve the habitat of the chimney swifts. We also tell the story of Dr. Stephen Tang at Orashore Technologies, have a wonderful 2-page editorial about the work that they're doing over there to develop at-home COVID testing, but also stories about Hector Lopez and the Southside ambassadors who are keeping the South Side clean and safe. Stories about Councilwoman Olga Negron, and just getting to know so many wonderful, impactful people at all levels. And then furthermore, through Fig, if you're a follower of Fig, you know that we develop very close relationships with nonprofits in the city through our social mission partnership. So in the last 4+ years that I've been working with Fig, we've had partnerships with our current social mission partner. We develop a year-long relationship with this nonprofit, is the Boys and Girls Club of Bethlehem. We've also worked with the Hispanic Center of the Lehigh Valley, Cafe the Lodge, the YWCA Bethlehem, and the Monocacy Farm Project. So again, to get back to your question, all of these sort of layers of experience through Fig have really brought me closer to what's happening in Bethlehem and inspired me deeply, certainly, to make the decision to run for council.
And I would add to that, before we get to the next question, is I've been fortunate to call Kiera a friend for several years now. And I think she would tell you that, like, when you talk to small businesses, what works for one business doesn't work for another business and doesn't work for another business. And they all have individual experiences and individual priorities. And I think one of the reasons why Kiera is going to be a great city councilwoman is the fact that that kind of like understanding of other people's experiences and balancing different interests and things like that. And I know when she told me she was going to run for city council, I just know from reading Fig magazine and how it touches every corner of the community, how that's exactly the type of voice that we need on city council to move Bethlehem forward. So, okay. Next one we got is development keeps coming up in this discussion, particularly in regards to how we are creating both new housing and housing incentives. How can we handle the increased traffic and parking issues that come with the increase in population in these already dense areas while still retaining a community feel in the residential areas? Thinking of the example of the new apartments going in off 378 in the old Masonic Temple, 60 plus apartment units will increase traffic on Brighton. Okay, so a lot to answer there in that question. But I think one of the things that we need to do is that we need to understand, and I think you're starting to see this, is that like if you want people not to have cars and not to use the cars, you need to create the environment around where they're living that they're able to travel to the services they need, whether or not it's a grocery store, whether or not it's whatever services you need. Ideally, and you see this in some parts of the city, and there are some people that have developed apartments where they say that they're demanded to have a certain amount of parking, and then it turns out that their tenants aren't even using the parking spaces because they decided not to have a car because they don't need one in the neighborhood that they live in. So like as we start to take a look at bringing more people to our downtown, ideally it is a situation where less people feel like they need to be able to use a car. But at the same time, we also know that some people are always going to have cars. And part of that comes down to, and I see we have another question coming up here about parking, and it mentions Polk Street, is that like we need to use our parking facilities effectively as far as building a parking garage on Polk Street as development there starts to increase, building a better version of the Walnut Street garage, and looking at kind of how we're going to integrate parking and also integrate it in a way that it adds to kind of the aesthetics of the neighborhood. But there is the demand there, and people want to live close to our downtowns. They want to be part of our south side. They want to be part of our north side. So it's going to be a balance going forward there as far as, balancing parking needs versus also increasing the kind of services and stuff we have in neighborhoods. So ideally, a lot of people don't need to use a car as much.
I'll just add, that you've made many great points there, but I really want to second the part where, we can create the parking, we can create the infrastructure, and that's great. But, you and I have talked many times about the importance of messaging and educating people and creating culture shifts. And it's not necessarily an if you build it, they will come. I don't tend to subscribe to that. I think it's important to do more than that. I feel strongly about inviting people in and including them and making sure that we're providing the messaging that it informs people about how and why to walk. And it's not just once, but sort of, giving that messaging from the city to inspire people to live in a different way. If you have been driving, if that's what you do, you're not suddenly going to become a walker. So how do we create that culture here?
Okay, thank you, Kiera. We are almost at 6:45 here. So we are going to transition to Hillary, who's going to come on. But I want to thank Kiera for joining us here. Hang tight, Kiera, and we're going to come back at 7 o'clock to kind of make some final comments here. But there is Kiera for Bethlehem.org. And once again, Kiera, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you in a little bit.
See you soon, Willie.
Okay, and now our third and final council candidate of the night is Hillary Kwiatek, another person that I've been fortunate enough to call friend for a long time. And Hillary, just like with Grace and Kiera, I'd like to start by letting you talk for a minute or two about yourself and your campaign for city council.
Sure. And again, just like everybody else said, thank you for this opportunity, Willie. I think it's been great. I've been sitting here watching everybody else and nodding my head a lot and thinking, how am I going to top that? So my name is Hillary Kwiatek. Some people say Kwiatek, and I answer to both. I've lived in Bethlehem since 2000. My husband, Brandon, an Allentown native and proud Allen High School graduate. Willie. He brought me here to the Lehigh Valley when we had one infant child, and we had been living in Washington, D.C. in a one-bedroom apartment. And we thought, where can we live where we can raise our family and have a great life? And the Lehigh Valley was our pick, and Bethlehem was really our only choice. When we got here, I was working in nonprofit fundraising. I had been doing that in art institutions and libraries around the country, Minneapolis, Washington, D.C. We met in graduate school in Kentucky, so I'd really lived in a lot of different places, which I think is a great asset when you're looking at helping to be on city council, helping to run a city. To have lots of examples of what you've liked and haven't liked. And so I came here, started working at PBS 39. I was the grant writer and then became the communications person, did a lot of pledge breaks, had a lot of fun there, and then moved on to a career in communications. So I kind of pivoted to communications, and now I've been at Lehigh University for 11 years this month. I'm the employee communications person, and that means that when we need to talk to our employees about anything, whether it's their benefits or diversity and inclusion and career enrichment and things like that, I'm the person who does that. So that means that I've developed a lot of skills in the communication realm, which I think is also really important for a city, how we communicate to each other, residents and government, can make or break, I think, the success of a city. And then, so at Lehigh, I think one of the things that has really influenced me is the work that I've done in diversity, inclusion, and equity. I'm on the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee. I've been part of the Council for Equitable Community, and have worked a lot on those kinds of issues. And I've been able to educate myself about those issues as well, which has led to a lot of awakening of understanding of what's going on in our world. And as Willie had said earlier, that my experience isn't the same experience as everybody in Bethlehem is having. And one of our great professors said something last winter that spurred me to run. She just said, if you want to have a just world, you have to have a just community, and it starts with you. And so I have taken that to heart. And my vision for Bethlehem is really an inclusive vision that integrates a lot of the stuff that folks have been talking about tonight. So I'm excited to talk more about that. Oh, and I have 2 kids, 2 cats. I live on the west side in a house that was built in 1860 on a street just to downtown. So I have a very walkable lifestyle also, walk to work, all of it. So let's go.
I want to, as before we answer that question, I just want to point out that Hillary, Kiera, and Grace all have something in common in that, and I say this as a complete positive, is that they weren't born in the city of Bethlehem, and that they came here from somewhere else. And I think one of the things that, we're going to have, in January is we're going to have people that have experienced life outside of Bethlehem. And, Bethlehem's a wonderful city, but everybody moved here at some point from somewhere else. And coming from other cities and experiencing life in other cities, I think it brings new ideas, and it brings energy, and it brings creativity. And I think that it's something that all three, that Grace, Hilda, and Kiera all have in common, that I just really, really, really love about what they're going to bring to city council, is the fact that they've lived in other cities, they've lived in other big cities, they've lived throughout the country. And I think that that's something that, we need to celebrate in the city of Bethlehem. Okay, so let's put up that first question there from Shirley Morganelli. Do you have a plan for a grocery store on the south side to replace A-Hearts? I guess I will kind of start by this. Is like, I think based on what we've seen the last couple of weeks, is that finding a new grocery store for that location is a complete priority. It's a priority for the residents of the South Side. It is a priority for people on City Council. It's a priority for the Don Ches administration. I think it's a priority for every candidate that's running for City Council. So I think getting everybody on the same page there has been important. And I would just say that I think the administration got the message loud and clear from the very passionate residents of the South Side, as well as members of City Council, that they need to do everything they can to work with the property owner to find a new tenant. And I think that hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll be hearing more about how that's going. But I think that everybody would probably agree that it's a priority for our community.
It really is, Willie. And one of the things that I think it was one of the most heartening experiences that I've had as a Bethlehem resident when a lot of times people will gather around kind of negative energy about something they're upset about. But this time it was all very positive. Everybody wanting to solve this problem, recognizing that on the south side, only having Seatown is just not acceptable. People who live on the west end of the south side, that's a very long walk. We have lots of people who don't own cars on the south side and need someplace they can walk to get good quality, fresh food. One of the things that I've thought about, and of course I'm not on council and I don't have any control over this, is that, when we're talking about an opportunity for maybe adding some affordable housing, looking at that property, is there an opportunity for the owner of that property to partner with a developer to create something almost like what is happening with the food co-op and having apartments above? I mean, it's a pretty big piece of land, and it might be possible to build up, to have that grocery store on the first floor and then to build up and have some affordable housing. It might add something to the viability of the grocery store. Since obviously this is, I think, the second time that we've lost that grocery store, there seems to be some issues in terms of viability and making the numbers work. Might be a way to make it a more profitable piece of land and property for the owner. So,
yeah. And I would add to that is I think that, we need to have a conversation as a community about whether or not any type of project like that would increase the quality of the grocery store. Because I think that Ahart's, while important, I think most people would agree, that we could get an even higher quality grocery into that location. But the bottom line is that we need to put a grocery store there. I know when I work at Allen High School and I see my students who choose their fast food options because it's the only place they walk by on the way home. Like, that is the only place they walk by. That is the only opportunity they have. And that's not their fault. That's a breakdown of the system. And, I think that this Ahart's is an example of something that we need to prioritize if we're going to be serious about these issues that we talk about with equity.
Yep. And Lehigh students use it too. We have a lot of Lehigh students living off campus, which is a whole other conversation about the South Side. And those students don't have cars. Many of them don't have cars, and they need to be able to get food too. So people from Fountain Hill come to that location. And I agree with the quality. The South Side deserves high quality grocery stores like the North Side, like, the suburbs. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, next question we have. Looks like somebody didn't want to put their name on this one. What does reimagining public safety mean to you? Hillary, I'll let you start with that.
Okay, so, there's been a lot of conversation around policing since the George Floyd murder certainly brought things to a head, although the conversation has certainly been ongoing since the birth of Black Lives Matter. It's a hot button issue. People have strong feelings. And to me, what I see as the need is to look at policing as part of a larger ecosystem of public safety in our city. So, we had a situation with the former police chief. That person's gone. We have a chance with a new police chief, some new vision to really reimagine, to really rethink how our police relate to our residents across the whole city, and what it means to keep people safe. I think that different people have different definitions of that. For me, part of that means really bringing our police department and our public health department, which has done incredible work during the pandemic, truly amazing work, to bring them together more in a partnership to prevent the kinds of tragedies, things that happened like up in East Stroudsburg earlier this year, and to get social workers, healthcare workers, addiction counselors, people like that more involved in dealing with calls that are nonviolent, calls that are not related to criminality in any way. Somebody looks like they're in distress, somebody is acting strangely, maybe it's a homeless person. So we've seen models of this in other cities that we're starting to see really good results on. Denver, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, both have indicated that adding social workers, psychiatrists, healthcare workers, other people to the mix in terms of response to calls like that have greatly reduced uses of force, violent incidents, all kinds of things. And not only that, have saved money, which I'm not in it for necessarily saving the money, but when you look at the reduction in use of force, you're looking at fewer lawsuits against a city or potential lawsuits. There are lots of benefits. If you can prevent someone from having a terrible incident where they end up, being killed or killing themselves, there's so many different ways that we can approach this issue that isn't just about using police. And police, they are trained for many things, but they're not experts in everything. And they are the call of last resort when things are going bad. I think as Chief Schiffer had said to me once, he's now the chief of police at Lehigh, but he was the chief of police in Bethlehem. He said, when you go to somebody, when you're the police, it's usually their worst day, right? Like they're having their worst day. And so a lot of times that can lead to a change in attitude by police officers because they see people kind of at their worst. So the idea is to have more community policing so that you're not only seeing people on their worst day, and then to integrate public health practices so that we're reducing those bad days altogether. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, reimagining public safety.
And I just would add a couple things to that. I think that, our new police chief, Chief Cott, has made it a priority, and she says this almost every time she speaks publicly, is that she wants to listen to the community about what they want from their police department, which I think is super, super important. And there will always be situations where you absolutely want a police officer to respond to that individual call. But there's also, we as a society put police officers in situations that are unfair to the police officers. And I know at Allen High School, like if the school district is thinking about adding staff or personnel to the high school, it's not just let's add more teachers. Sometimes we add parent liaisons. Sometimes we add school psychologists. Sometimes we add mental health advocates. Is that one of the things I think we can do is take a look at how do we make our police officer job easier. Like, do we want the liaison between the city of Bethlehem and Northampton County and Lehigh County, their mental health, services? What is it that we can do in our community? And I know that Chief Cott has talked a lot about how she wants to get more and more officers out into the community, out into talking to people. And I guess the final thing I would say is, it's like I've been using the analogy, like you count from 1 to 10. And like the police officer shows up when it's 10. And Hillary said, it's like, as Jason used to say, it's like if the police call you, it's probably their worst day. Like we have failed as a society if we're not investing in 1 through 9, if we're not making sure that our public schools are funded, if we're not making sure that mental health services are funded, if we're not making sure that there's recreational opportunities for youth. I know that, one of the things that I've grown with as a teacher is that when a student comes in and has some type of behavior issue, it's taken me a while to realize that behavior issue is probably coming weeks, months, years in advance. So it's just, we have to kind of balance that going forward. But, I think we're on the right track with Chief Cott.
And, I know we want to go to another question, but I just want to say that by bringing in the school piece, it reminds me just that, my priorities, pandemic recovery, livability, which is affordable housing and homelessness, the climate action plan, vibrant neighborhoods, addressing racism and inequality, and the public safety piece of it. I look at them all very much as intertwined, and that's why I think of wraparound care like at a school similarly for a city, that we are not all just pick up my trash or pick up my plow my snow and then call the cops. There's a lot of other things going on in our lives. And so when Grace was talking about the transient nature of her kids' existence, her students in Easton, that leads to problematic schooling outcomes for kids because their housing is unstable because it's not affordable, right? So it's all connected. And I see all of the issues that we're facing in the city as having, they're all in dialogue with each other, and we can solve problems, more than one problem at a time, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah.
I agree. Okay. Steve R. asked, can you talk about your work with the Connecting Bethlehem survey and what you learned about communication with city residents? Hillary, it says your work, so I guess that could have been either one.
Oh, but it was your work too, Willie.
I'll let you, you can go first. You can go first.
So in 2017, after You Know Who Won President, Willie, you said, we're on our own now. We got to do some stuff here, right? And you created Bethlehem 2017, I think it was called. God, that seems like a long time ago now. But your priorities were the Climate Action Plan, open data, and we at first called it the Social Media Working Group, and then it was kind of like Communications Working Group. But ultimately, you asked if I would serve on this working group, and we called it Connecting Bethlehem. And what we wanted to find out was, how do the residents of Bethlehem want the city to communicate with them? How do they already receive communications? What are they using? Because the city is communicating in a lot of different ways. Almost every department has its own social media presence on multiple platforms. There's email, there's still phone lines, all kinds of things. And we sent out a survey, we developed a survey. We sent it out. We had it translated into Spanish so that we could reach the Spanish-speaking community as well. Unfortunately, not so many replies from that one. And then we got over 1,000 responses, and we really tabulated the information. And what we learned was that people were confused. They felt there were too many places where information was happening, and not a singular voice of the city that they could kind of depend on as, this is where I go, and I can count on it having the information I need. And so there was a very strong sense to me in the data that people wanted lots of information. They wanted to know about everything that was going on, but they wanted it in a unified voice and, someplace they would know where to turn to. So they didn't want people to end their social media accounts or anything, but they wanted at least to know that there was some kind of unified message that they could count on. Yeah, so that's what I learned.
And I would add to that is that I think one of the things that we saw is that, while some people are happy with the way we run our social media and communicate, is that there was, as Hillary said, there was a desire for a more kind of centralized communication strategy, as if there's like one place that we can necessarily go, which is a challenge because some people like to get information in different ways. A couple takeaways, though, from the Connecting Bethlehem survey is that if you took a look at, and I actually think that it was closer to like about 1,400 people that responded to that survey, but like 5 of the 1,400 responded to the survey in Spanish. And when you take a look at our census data, and I think it's approximately 20% of Bethlehem residents, Spanish is the primary language spoken at home, that is a problem. That is a systemic problem that falls on City Hall. And we see the same thing. I looked at our Bethlehem app, which is wonderful now, that people use. I looked at it about a month and a half ago when there were snow complaints and, snow service requests. And there were a bunch on the west side in the avenues. There were a bunch in Center City. There were a bunch in North Bethlehem. And there were like 5 on the south side. And if you know the geography of the south side, it's not that there are less problems over there. It was that there is a disconnect between how people are necessarily able to report that. And if people are not reporting those issues, those are quality of life issues. And then once again, that is a systemic issue. So the way that we communicate with our residents, we need to utilize technology better. And, I've been talking a lot about that on the campaign trail. People always have their phones in their hand. They're always looking like, how can I get the text update as far as the snow emergency? How can I find out, we should be able to watch where the snow plows are on our phones. There's a lot of things that we're going to be able to do in the future. But the biggest thing I think, as far as Connecting Bethlehem taught me, or that I learned from, was just the digital divide and how it is our responsibility as elected officials to fix that.
I agree. And one last note, there was a strong interest in text and texting, and I think that's a place where we can reach we can bridge the digital divide, because everybody has a phone. maybe not the internet, but texting is something where we could really, I think, help bridge the digital divide in our communications.
Okay, thank you, Hillary. We are
Sure.
going to bring back on Grace and Kiera here. So then we're all going to kind of make our last kind of comment here for a minute or so, just to kind of, put in our last, we got a question here that I guess we can answer. So as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, what are you most looking forward to in Bethlehem once things get back to normal? So maybe we can answer this question in 30 to 45 seconds. Then we each can kind of make a minute last comment, and then we'll take off, because we said no longer than an hour and 15 minutes, and we want to keep that promise. So Grace, we'll start with you. What are you most looking forward to once things get back to normal?
Great. Well, that's an easy one for me. I absolutely love music. I love the music festivals. I spend a lot of time. I go to Steel Stacks every weekend to listen to the music, see people. I love Music Fest, Celtic Fest. So I'm really looking forward to getting back down to Steel Stacks and the music festivals. Also having my family, like I said, I'm from a very big family, and we haven't really been able to get together in the last year. So I'm really looking forward to them coming down and visiting and taking them to all the great sites in Bethlehem.
Kiera?
Yes, ditto on the music festivals, Grace. Absolutely. The last music fest I attended, this the first time they had this donut vendor. The donut was the size of my head, and I didn't get to have it last year. I really missed it. So I'm also a big food person, so I'm looking forward to going out to eat. I've learned to become a takeout person, but I really enjoy eating in restaurants. So, Music Fest gives us both the performing arts and food. So looking forward to that.
Okay. So my husband would answer that very easily, which is not Granny McCarthy's. I'm going to always call it Granny McCarthy's Red Stag at the bar, Guinness. Like, that is his vision of back to normal. I am looking forward to sitting at Flying V and eating poutine, not in my living room. I agree with the food thing. Absolutely. And I love bar reform, and I haven't been comfortable going to megaformer classes and spin classes at the wonderful Nora's establishment. So group exercise classes. I mean, I exercise at home, but I love taking those classes. So.
And I would add that I'm looking forward to just going to any of those community events where you run into all of those people that you've known for a long time, or you just met. It could be a Liberty football game. It could be Music Fest. It could be whatever it might be. But I think there's nothing more wonderful than, in an age of, everything is connected on our phone, is when we go somewhere and we run into somebody that we didn't know was going to be there. And it just reminds us of how wonderful our community is. So, okay, I will then, now we're each going to kind of give our kind of last minute here to kind of wrap up. And I guess, Grace, we'll start with you again.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Willie, and thank you, Hillary and Kiera, for everyone for joining us and letting me be a part of this tonight. It was great. Thank you, everyone. George, for getting this going and taking care of the technology, which I don't like to do. And thank you for everyone for jumping on board tonight to talk to us and engage in really great questions. So I thank everyone who has supported me in the past, and I really hope I can look forward to everyone's support in May. As I said before, I feel like it's a real honor and privilege. I've been an advocate all my life for people, like I said, people with disabilities, addictions, mental health issues, you name it. And I feel like that's my role. My primary role on council is to be a representative and an advocate for the people in the community, so that we can move Bethlehem forward to make it the most diverse and inclusive and welcoming community that there is. So thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Kiera?
Yes, let me certainly echo Grace's thanks to you, Willie, for hosting, to Grace and Hillary for participating, and everyone else, all of you out there who are watching. Your interest in local politics means a lot to us. We feel very supported by your presence, and I'd like to thank everybody who has actively supported my campaign thus far. I'm just so excited about the opportunity to better serve Bethlehem as a member of council, and I will encourage you. This was a short opportunity to get to know me a little bit, but please learn more on my website at kieraforbethlehem.org. where you can donate or sign up to volunteer. We're going to have some great volunteer opportunities coming up. And I just found out today that my signs have arrived. So moments ago, we set up a pickup event at Backdoor Bake Shop this Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon. So please stop by. I'll be outside with signs. Whether you have signed up or not, we'll have plenty for everybody. So please come by and pick up your sign. And thanks again for your support.
Thank you, Kiera. Hillary?
Thank you again. Thanks, Willie. Thanks, George, for producing behind the scenes. It's been a very exciting week. There have been a lot of endorsements coming out. I know that Grace and Kiera and I have all been divorced. I have not been divorced. Endorsed by Lehigh Valley Roar. That was really hard to say. We were all also endorsed by Lehigh Valley for All. And I was endorsed by Lehigh Valley Stands Up and also by Representative Jeannie McNeil. And I want to thank all of those activists. All of those groups represent hundreds and hundreds of people who really care about our community. And so it's exciting to feel the energy of their excitement about this campaign getting underway. This gets decided in the primary. So it's really, really important that everybody focus on getting out the vote in the primary and making sure that we have a great new slate of candidates for City Council. I just would humbly ask for your support. I also have yard signs. Go to my Facebook page. You can find out how to get one. My literature has arrived as well, so I'll be hitting the doors. And look forward to getting out there and talking to residents and finding out what their priorities are and just listening. So thank you again.
Thank you, Hillary. And I want to thank all three of you. And Kiera, feel free to drop off your yard sign. It's going to have to go between Grace and Hillary, but it's, there's
Happy to share the space.
Natalie has designed the front yard perfectly for it. So, but I want to thank you guys for coming today. And, it's, hopefully we can do this again before Election Day. Next week, we're going to have Rachel Leone, who's also running for City Council, and the school board candidates, as I said before, which is going to be a wonderful day. I think that this has worked well. We'll have to be like one of those bands that doesn't play too often in the same area to keep up, interest and demand. But we'll come back in a couple of weeks. And I want to thank everybody that submitted questions, and we try to get to as many of them as possible. Like I said, we're having another one of these events next Wednesday at 6 p.m. So we're going to try to cover some different topics, and I think it's been wonderful. So once again, I thank everybody for coming, and I thank everybody for their interest in the process. And I will see you guys next week. Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you.